For more than 75 years, China and North Korea have stood side by side. They were both born out of the ashes of World War II, forged by communist ideology, and tied together by geography. On paper, they should be natural allies, but behind the handshakes and speeches lies a relationship filled with tension, mistrust, and competing interests. Today, many analysts argue that North Korea is no longer an asset for China, but a burden. Kim Jong-un's relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons, constant missile tests, and unpredictable behavior have forced Beijing into an impossible balancing act. At the same time, Pyongyang is looking elsewhere for support, most notably toward Russia. This shift has created a dangerous question. What happens if North Korea chooses Russia over China? Because here's the reality. Without Chinese trade, aid, and protection, North Korea's fragile economy could collapse almost overnight. That's the story we're diving into today, how a 75-year-old partnership is unraveling, why it matters for the region, and what it means for the future of the Korean Peninsula. So, to really understand the cracks in today's relationship, we need to look at how it all began. After World War II, both China and North Korea emerged as new communist states. Their bond was sealed during the Korean War of the early 1950s, when Chinese troops poured across the border to fight alongside North Korea against U.S. and South Korean forces. That experience wasn't just about ideology, it was about survival. For Pyongyang, China was the big brother that kept it alive. For Beijing, North Korea became a protective buffer zone, standing between China and a U.S.-backed South Korea. This military partnership was formalized in 1961, when the two countries signed the Mutual Defense Treaty. On paper, that meant if either side was attacked, the other was obligated to step in. For China, this was no small commitment. It actually remains Beijing's only official defense treaty with another country. But even in those early years, the relationship was complicated. North Korea fiercely guarded its independence, often resisting China's attempts to influence its domestic policies. China, meanwhile, always saw North Korea less as a true equal and more as a strategic shield on its northeast border. That foundation, part friendship, part necessity, explains why China has tolerated so much from Pyongyang over the decades. But it also shows why their relationship has always carried an undercurrent of suspicion. If there's one thing that shows just how dependent North Korea is on China, it's the economy. North Korea is one of the most isolated countries in the world, heavily sanctioned and cut off from most international trade. Yet it survives, and the main reason is China. For more than 2 decades, Beijing has been Pyongyang's largest trading partner, responsible for about 98% of North Korea's official imports and exports in recent years. That number is staggering. Imagine running a business where almost every dollar comes from a single customer. Losing that customer would mean instant collapse. That's North Korea's reality. China supplies North Korea with food, fuel, and basic goods that the regime simply cannot provide on its own. This lifeline is critical because the country has suffered repeated famines and natural disasters. In the 1990s, famine killed anywhere from 500,000 to 3 million people. Even today, the United Nations estimates that around 40% of North Korea's population, about 11 million people, is undernourished. Without Chinese food and energy support, those numbers could rise dramatically. Beyond aid, China has also built the infrastructure that keeps trade flowing. In 2015, it opened a high-speed rail link from Dandong to Shenyang, and even a dedicated cargo route for coal exports. These projects were meant to keep Pyongyang connected to the outside world, but only through China's gate. This dependency gives Beijing incredible leverage. At any moment, it could tighten the screws and bring North Korea's fragile economy to its knees. But China rarely does that, because economics is only part of the story. Beijing's bigger concern has always been stability, and that's where the balancing act begins. China's approach to North Korea can be summed up in one word: balance. On the surface, Beijing says it wants a denuclearized Korean peninsula. After all, a nuclear-armed North Korea risks sparking an arms race in East Asia, pushing South Korea or even Japan closer to developing their own nuclear weapons. That would put even more United States military power right on China's doorstep, the exact scenario Beijing wants to avoid. But here's the catch. While China opposes Pyongyang's nuclear program, it fears instability even more. The nightmare scenario for Beijing is the sudden collapse of the Kim regime. If that happened, millions of desperate North Korean refugees could flood across the border into northeast China. Worse, South Korea, backed by the United States military, could potentially take control of the north, erasing the buffer zone that China has relied on for decades. This is why China often looks, well, inconsistent. In 2022, for example, Pyongyang carried out repeated missile tests. The United States pushed for tougher international sanctions, but China vetoed those measures. Why? Because punishing North Korea too harshly risked pushing it toward collapse. And collapse is the one thing Beijing refuses to gamble on. So China walks a tightrope. It criticizes North Korea's weapons programs, but it also shields Pyongyang from the full force of international pressure. The message is clear: stability comes first, denuclearization second. But this delicate balance is now being tested like never before, because North Korea has started looking past Beijing and building a new alliance with Moscow. During Russia's war in Ukraine, North Korea reportedly provided military support, from ammunition to even manpower, in exchange for advanced weapons technology and other benefits. For Pyongyang, this partnership offers a chance to strengthen its arsenal and show the world it isn't entirely dependent on China. But here's the problem. This move directly challenges Beijing's role as North Korea's primary patron. By siding with Moscow, Kim Jong-un is essentially ignoring Chinese concerns and risking the fragile balance he has with Xi Jinping. For China, the idea of North Korea turning into a Russian client state is not only insulting, it's destabilizing. The irony is striking. North Korea relies almost completely on China for its survival, yet it is cozying up to another power that can't provide the same economic safety net. Russia may supply weapons or military know-how, but it cannot replace the food, energy, and trade that only China can deliver. This gamble may buy Kim short-term leverage, but it risks burning bridges with the one ally that actually keeps his country alive. And if China decides to punish Pyongyang for leaning too heavily on Moscow, the consequences for North Korea could be severe. That brings us to the next question. What would actually happen if China decided to pull back its support and turn the screws on Kim Jong-un's regime? China's economic grip on North Korea is so tight that if Beijing ever decided to cut support, Pyongyang would feel the pain almost instantly. Think of it like a patient on life support. China controls the oxygen. If that supply is shut off, survival becomes nearly impossible. Here's what the fallout would look like. First, trade would collapse. Remember, nearly 98% of North Korea's imports and exports go through China. Without Chinese fuel, factories would shut down. Without food shipments, the country could face famine conditions similar to the devastating 1990s crisis, when up to 3 million people are believed to have died. Second, Pyongyang would lose another vital income stream, its workers abroad. Reports suggest around 40,000 North Korean laborers are sent to Chinese factories, with their wages funneled back to the regime. Cut that off, and Kim loses badly needed hard currency. Third, defections could surge. There are already between 50,000 and 200,000 North Korean defectors living in China. If the economy collapses, many more could attempt the dangerous journey across the border. This would create not only a humanitarian crisis, but also a political one for Beijing, which already faces criticism for forcibly repatriating defectors. And finally, there's the military angle. If North Korea provoked a war with the South while isolated from Beijing, it would likely face defeat. The United States and its allies would back Seoul, while China, without economic or political reasons to intervene, might simply stand aside. At the heart of the China-North Korea relationship lies the 1961 Mutual Defense Treaty. On paper, it sounds ironclad. If one country is attacked, the other is obligated to help. For decades, this treaty was North Korea's ultimate insurance policy, a guarantee that if war broke out, China would have its back. But in reality, the treaty isn't so simple. Beijing has quietly signaled that its commitment depends on who fires the first shot. If the United States or South Korea attacked North Korea unprovoked, China might step in to defend Pyongyang. But if Kim Jong-un started a conflict himself, for example by launching an invasion or missile strike, China could very well stay neutral. That distinction changes everything. And the signs of Beijing pulling back are already visible. In May 2024, China joined Japan and South Korea for their first trilateral summit in Seoul in more than 4 years. That meeting was symbolic. It showed China wants to maintain stable ties with its neighbors and avoid being dragged into a so-called triple axis with Russia and North Korea. For Kim Jong-un, that's, well, a worrying signal. His most important ally may actually be preparing to distance itself if tensions escalate. The stakes here are enormous. If war broke out tomorrow, South Korea would be guaranteed United States support, while Pyongyang could no longer be certain of China's military backing. That leaves North Korea dangerously exposed, and really shows just how risky Kim's pivot to Russia actually is. The relationship between China and North Korea has always been complicated. It's a mix of history, necessity, and honestly, a fair amount of mistrust. But today, it's reaching a turning point. Kim Jong-un's choice to lean toward Russia may feel like a bold move, but it could also be the biggest gamble of his career. Looking ahead, there are, 3 possible futures. First, the status quo continues. China keeps North Korea on life support, providing food, fuel, and trade in exchange for stability. It's not ideal for Beijing, but it avoids collapse. Second, North Korea doubles down with Russia and risks losing Beijing's support. That path could lead to economic freefall, famine, and military isolation. In this scenario, Kim may discover that Russia cannot replace what China provides. And third, there's a slim but important possibility of negotiation. If China finds common ground with the United States and South Korea, pressure could mount on Pyongyang to rein in its nuclear program. That might open the door to economic relief, but it would demand concessions Kim has resisted for decades. No matter which future plays out, one fact remains. Without China, North Korea cannot survive. And Kim's decision to gamble with Moscow may cost him the one ally that truly keeps his regime alive. So, what do you think? Is North Korea making a smart strategic move by courting Russia, or is it digging its own grave by risking China's support? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into global geopolitics.